I'm Lori Broseski from Threadplay with Bernina in Denver, Colorado. I'm going to show you how to make a durable face mask with bias ties. These face masks are preferable to the masks with the elastic ear loops because the elastic breaks down very quickly with the high temperature sterilization in medical facilities. It can also break down with repeated washing at home. We'll use a Bernina sewing machine, a number 1 or 1C all-purpose foot, and a 5.5 millimeter or 9 millimeter throat plate. The number 1 foot and throat plates each came standard with your machine. We'll also use the Bernina number 88 binder attachment. The binder is available in 3 sizes. The 28 millimeter, which creates a finished width of about 1/4 inch. The 32 millimeter binder creates a finished width of about 1/3 of an inch, and the 38 millimeter finishes at about 3/8 of an inch. I'm going to use the smallest binder today, but these instructions can be used for any size binder. You'll also need a number 95 or 95C foot, which allows the binder to be positioned properly against the foot and closer to the needle. The number 95 feet and number 88 binder have been designed for use on all computerized Bernina sewing machines made after 1998. We need only basic shapes cut from quilting cotton. 2 7-inch by 9-inch rectangles and 2 36-inch lengths of bias cut strips. The width of the bias strips should be 1 inch for the 28 millimeter binder. If you're using the 32 millimeter binder, cut your strips 1 1/4 inch wide. And if you're using the 38 millimeter binder, you'll cut your strips 1 1/2 inch wide. The fabric will behave best in the binder when it's cut on a true 45-degree angle. It's fine to seam those bias strips together to get enough length. We also need a 6-inch piece of lightweight wire, such as florist wire, or this copper wire that I'm going to use. Bend the ends of the wire back so that they don't poke holes in the finished mask. Now let's get ready to sew. Set your machine up with a straight stitch at the default stitch length, your number 1 foot, and your 5.5 millimeter or 9 millimeter throat plate. You'll also need a size 80 universal needle. Place your mask fabrics right sides together. We're going to sew the 2 7-inch shorter sides. I like to place a few pins to keep everything together. I'll put one in the middle. And I'll do the other side. We're going to stitch our short sides in about a 3/8 inch seam allowance. If you're using a C foot, you can simply line the edge of your fabric up with the edge of your presser foot, and that'll give you about 3/8 inch seam allowance. If you're using the narrower number 1 foot, you'll need to move your needle position a few clicks to the left to get something close to a 3/8 inch seam allowance. And removing pins as I sew. There's the first side. And now for the second. Now bring your mask to the ironing board, turn it right side out, and press your seams. Bring the mask back to the sewing machine. We're going to pin 3 pleats along the finished sides that we just created. We're going to keep the folds of those pleats about 1 inch from the raw edges just to allow room for binding. So I'm going to place a couple of pins 1 inch from the raw edges as my guideline. I'll do that on each side. Now here's the last one. And again, we aren't quilting here, so close enough is good enough. I'm just going to estimate those pleats. We want them about equal sizes, but we don't need to be perfect. There's my second pleat and my finger, and the third pleat. Now I'm going to spin this around. It's important that I create the pleats on the other side going the same direction as the first side. So those were pointing to my right, so I'm going to start this pleat going this direction. Pleat number 2. And the last pleat. So you can see, if I pull this straight, that my pleats are going straight across and they aren't twisted. Top stitch your pleats in place. We want about a 1/8 inch top stitch line. With my 1 C-foot, I'm moving my needle all the way to the right. If you're using the narrower number 1 foot, you may not want to take it all the way to the right. Now I'm getting to where I'm climbing up a pleat here. I don't think you can see it very well from this camera angle, but the pleat wants to catch on the front of the presser foot. So I stop, use my knee lift lever to raise that presser foot, let the fabric relax, and keep on sewing. I'm going to do that several times as I stitch across these pleats. And here's that last pleat. Now I'll flip it around, do the other side. This side's going to be a little easier because I'm not climbing up against the fold of the pleat. But I may still need to stop and let my fabric relax a little bit by using my knee lift lever to raise and lower that presser foot. This is what the mask should look like after stitching the pleats on both sides. Now let's mark the centers of all of our pieces to make everything easier to match up in the next few steps. I'm going to take my mask and fold it in half with the raw edges aligned, and I'm just going to put a pin at the fold, and I'll turn it around and mark the other side. I also want to mark my bias strips, so I've got them folded in half. I'll come down here to the fold and place 1 pin in each bias strip. Here's the second one, already folded. And I've got a pin at the center. I'm going to lightly secure my wire to the top of the face mask to make everything a little easier to control as I send it through the binder later on. Notice that I have my pleats facing down, so this is the top of the mask. I'm going to spin this around and just kind of roughly estimate where the center is. I'll trap the wire against the edge of my fabric. I'm returning my needle position to center and choosing a zigzag stitch. The default width should be good. I have taken my length all the way to 0 because I don't really want this fabric to advance while I take a few stitches securing the wire to the edge. So I'm going to hand guide my needle to make sure that it's going to clear that wire and just take a few stitches. That's good. Now I'll move my fabric forward. Again, your knee lift lever will come in very handy here so that you can have both hands on your fabric. Get everything centered up here. And again, hand wheel my needle to be sure that it's going to clear that wire. Take a few more stitches. And we'll go down to the last end here. Well, that doesn't want to cooperate very well. Thank goodness for stilettos and again knee lift levers to keep that presser foot up. There, that should be good. Hand wheel through the stitch. Man, that's really close. So I'm just going to continue hand wheeling through 2 or 3 stitches here to be sure that I don't catch the wire. And I don't want to use my automatic thread cutter here because I want to avoid the wire. I'll pull my fabric out and use my scissors to cut. Now we're going to attach the binder to the sewing machine. I'm going to start by returning my stitch to a straight stitch. Default is fine for right now. I'll take my 1C foot off and grab my number 95. Now I want you to take a look at this number 95 and notice that the right hand side is very slightly narrower than the left hand side. That's so that the binder can snug up closer to the right side of the presser foot and get closer to the needle. Now some 95C feet actually have a notch cut out here. That's just fine too. Take a look at these 2 holes in the bed of your sewing machine. We're going to use the far left hole to secure the binder to the machine. I'm going to lower my presser foot so that I can set the binder right up against the side here and grab my black screw, it's just a finger screw, and screw that into the far left hole. There we go. We'll put our bias strip into the binder. I've got the wrong side of the fabric facing to the left. That's the right side. We're going to push it into the wide portion of the binder. And I'm just using my thumb to help advance that until I can grab a hold of it with the stiletto and pull it on through the curls of the binder. And I'm going to pull it on back and trap those folds underneath my presser foot. You'll need to adjust your needle position so that your needle will catch the two folded edges. Now, I can't give you an exact amount to move your needle position over because it depends on whether you have a regular foot or a C foot, also the width of the binding that you're making. So in this case, with the 28 millimeter binder and I've got a C foot on, I've got my needle position moved 3. It reflects number 3 on the screen. So I'm going to begin stitching, trapping the folds. I'm going to move that over one more just to be sure I've got plenty of that fold. And I'm going to continue stitching until the pin that marked the center of my bias binding gets close to the opening here. Oh, can you see that I'm coming up on a seam here? That is no problem. I'm going to send the seam through the binder. And I'm a slow stitcher anyway. I'm just going to keep on stitching slowly here to give the binder plenty of time to roll and fold that seam. Okay, now my pin is just about at the opening of the binder. I am going to line the edge or the pin of my mask up with the pin in the binder just to kind of estimate where those centers are going to fall. So I can see that I need to take a few more stitches. How am I doing? All right, we're getting pretty close here. So I'm going to take the pin out of my binding, take 2 or 3 more stitches, then guide my fabric in between these 2 folds. I'm going to guide my mask in between these 2 folds of the bias binding and just guide it right on through with the binding. Now this is where it's going to be a little tricky because I've got that wire pushed right up next to the edge too. So I'm going to stitch very slowly to be sure that everything is pushed in close and that I'm not hitting the wire with my needle. Oh, I've got that center pin still in there. I'm going to take that out. Keep my mask pushed right up into that bias binding fold and taking care with my wire. Okay, we're almost there. Okay, I'm pretty sure I'm past that wire. I can speed it up a little bit now. Notice that I am just stitching right off the mask and continuing to stitch on the bias binding. This is going to form the other side of the tie at the top of the mask. There we go. We'll bind the other side of the mask now. I've got my bias strip, pushing it into the wide opening of the binder with the wrong side facing to the left. I'll use my finger to push it as far as I can, grab my stiletto, raise my presser foot, and I'm drawing that fabric right on through, lower my presser foot and trap the folds in place. So I'm going to do it just like I did the other side and begin sewing until the pin approaches the opening of my bias binder. Here comes the pin. I'll stop, grab my mask, estimate about how much further I need to stitch until, oh, looks like it's ready to guide under there right about now. So I'm going to remove both of these pins, guide the fabric in between the curls of the binder and the two folds of the bias fabric. Stitch right up onto the mask, keeping those raw edges snugged up into the binder. Whoops, looks like I got a seam that headed into the opening and it wasn't quite flat, so use the stiletto to flatten that out. I can see it right here. There we go, that's better. And again, so slowly as that bias binder forms the curl around the seam. There we go, the seam is through. I'm off the edge of the mask. I can speed it up a little bit. So the rest of my tie and I have both edges bound. So now all we have left to do is finish the ends of our ties. So you'll notice that the leading edge of this bias tie, where it first came out of the binder before we began stitching, it's a little sloppy. So I'm just going to trim that off. Now when I use the binder for craft use or even making masks for home use, I'll finish this off very simply by just tying a knot in the end. I'm not going to tie that too tight because I've got to get it back out. If you are making the masks for medical use, I suggest that you go ahead and hem the ends of the ties just so there aren't so many folds and creases for germs to get stuck in. It'll allow them to sterilize it better. So I folded under, maybe a 1/2 or 3/4 of an inch. This is a little tricky, I'll be honest with you, because it's so narrow. Go ahead and place that underneath the presser foot. I'm going to scoot that up a little bit to allow some room to back stitch. This doesn't have to be perfect. And I'll back stitch again. So my first tie is hemmed, and I'll go along and finish the other 3 ties. Now that you know how to make a face mask with the BERNINA binder number 88, what else can you use that binder for when you don't have to make masks anymore? The 28mm and 32mm binder sizes are wonderful for garment making and for finishing off crafts. That 38mm binder is perfect for binding quilts because it finishes it at about 1/2 inch. You can even miter corners on your quilts with that binder. BERNINA has a wonderful video on how to do that. We'll link to that video in the description below. If you live in the Denver metro area and would like to purchase a BERNINA binder number 88, please contact Threadplay with BERNINA. Our contact information will be in the information below. If you live outside of the Denver metro area, I'm sure your local BERNINA dealer would be happy to help you.